It is the year 332 BC. A young Macedonian man, just 24 years old, conquers the land of Israel. For him, it's just another stop on the way in his great mission to defeat and rule the entire Persian Empire, a goal that he will achieve shortly after in the Battle of Gaugamela in modern-day Iraq. 8 years later, Alexander the Great dies from a sudden illness when he is only 32 and at the peak of his power. On his deathbed, Alexander is asked who will inherit his vast empire, the greatest the world has ever known. His answer is quiet and firm: to the strongest. Alexander's death and the war that followed between his generals started a chain of events that 156 years later would push the Jewish community to rebel and fight against the Greek control over this land, a rebellion that would also include a miracle of a lamp in a temple in Jerusalem that Jews around the world commemorate and celebrate yearly for 8 full days. I am Itai, I am a tour guide here in Israel, and today I invite you to join me as we explore the story of Hanukkah, the history, traditions, and food of the celebration of light. Chapter 1: The Greeks are coming. When Alexander the Great dies and doesn't leave a heir, it starts a war of succession over the empire. It is known as the War of the Diadochi. 7 generals fought each other for 40 years until 3 main kingdoms were created. 2 of them are very relevant to our story. The kingdom of the general Ptolemy, or Ptolemy in short, that took over Egypt, and by the way, the last ruler of his family's dynasty was Cleopatra, and the kingdom of the general Seleucus, that took over Syria, Persia, and Mesopotamia. And so it happened that the land of Israel found itself right in the middle, caught between 2 powerful Hellenistic kingdoms that didn't exactly like each other. For nearly 100 years, in 6 different wars, the land of Israel was a battlefield between those 2 empires, each one trying to take control of the narrow land bridge connecting Asia to Africa. The most famous battle of these wars took place in 217 BC in Rafah, when 140,000 troops were fighting each other using nearly 200 war elephants. It was one of the largest use of elephants to fight in history, and the only battle in which African elephants were fighting Asian elephants. In that battle, Ptolemies won, and under the rule of the Ptolemaic kingdom, for the most part, the Jews enjoyed relative autonomy, and the relationship between the Jewish leaders and the Ptolemaic rulers was good. 17 years later, the map changed again as Seleucus took over in a battle in Banyas at the foothills of the Golan Heights. At the time, Antioch III, also known as Antioch Homegas the Great, was ruling over the kingdom, and he tried to build a good relationship with the Jewish community, cancelling taxation for 3 years, helping building the walls of Jerusalem, and allowing freedom of religious practice. But after his death, his son, Seleucus IV, took power and finds that the kingdom is in heavy debt and the treasury is empty. The reason for it was a series of conquests that his father did on Roman soil, but then lost to the Romans. After the loss, the Romans demanded and received very heavy taxation from Antiochus III. When Seleucus IV takes power, those Roman taxes are still a huge burden on the Seleucian kingdom. In order to improve this situation, he raises the taxes and also looks for opportunities to get more money and fast. If you will ever go to the Israel Museum in Jerusalem, you will see the Heliodorus stele. Heliodorus was viceroy to Seleucus IV, and in the stele there are 3 official letters in which it also says that Antiochus IV appoints Olympiodorus to be in charge of all the temples in Quilia, Syria, and Phoenicia. This area also includes the land of Israel and Jerusalem in it. You may think that this is a small thing with little significance, but what it really means is that a Seleucian official is now in charge of all the temples in the region and can take money from their treasuries. And temples at the time were the closest thing that was to a modern day's bank, where both individuals and institutions deposited money because it was considered the safest place for it. So basically, a Seleucian pagan official now has the right to go into the temple in Jerusalem, make decisions about it, and take money that is stored in the temple. And that is, for the Jews at the time, more than an insult. It is a serious threat on the freedom of religious practice. In the book of Maccabees, there is a story about Heliodorus coming to the temple in Jerusalem to take money from its treasury, but then being beaten hard and saved in the last moment by the high priest Chonio III. Whether this story happened in this way or not, it comes to show the divine protection over the temple from the Seleucian rulers. Seleucus IV ruled for 12 years, and then murdered by Heliodorus himself that hoped to take his position. But then Seleucus IV's brother, Antiochus IV, came and took the throne. Antiochus IV was also known as Antiochus Epiphanes, meaning the God manifest, but the Jews called him Antioch Ephimanes, which meant Antiochus the Crazy. When Antiochus was young, he was taken to Rome as a hostage. It was a part of the surrender agreement between his father, Antiochus III, and the Romans. So he grew up in Rome, fell in love with Roman Hellenistic culture, and when he became the ruler of the Seleucian kingdom, he saw himself as a messenger that needs to bring that culture to the east and spread it. His vision was creating a unified empire living by the same culture and following the same religious practices. So he started investing a lot of effort building schools, gymnasiums that were based on Greek, Roman culture and studies. In those schools, men, for example, were completely naked, and many Jews started following in that direction. That created a growing split and tension inside the Jewish community between the majority that despised these institutions and what they represented, seeing them as a threat to the true Jewish values, especially in Jerusalem, and those that saw the Greek-Roman culture as a sign of progress, beauty, and intellect, and saw no problem combining those with the Torah studies and the Jewish lifestyle. Most of those were among the intellect and religious elite. A derogatory word that was used back then to describe those that chose to study in the Greek institutions was made mityavnim, those that became like the Greeks. And interestingly, this word is still used today by very religious people that want to point out Jews that in their eyes lost the Jewish way of life and values. In 175 BC, Onias III, the high priest of Jerusalem at the time, was removed from office by his own brother Yason. Yason bribed Antiochus with a large sum of money, purchasing the title of the high priest, a position that until then was inherited through the priestly line of Tzadok alone. In return, Antiochus confirmed him in office, marking the first time in Jewish history that the high priesthood was bought with money rather than granted by a lineage of merit, though Yason was from the right family lineage. Yason then began transforming Jerusalem into a Hellenistic city, building a gymnasium, promoting Greek customs, and even registering its citizens as Antiochians. But Yason's reign didn't last long. Only 3 years later, in 172 BC, another man appeared, Menelaus. Menelaus was not even from the priestly lineage of Tzadok, and when Antiochus visited Jerusalem, Menelaus saw an opportunity and promised the king an even greater bribe than Yason had paid, and Antiochus accepted. Menelaus, now high priest himself, was desperate to deliver the money he owed the king, and stole sacred vessels from the temple treasury, golden items that were dedicated to God, and gave it to Antiochus as payment. When the Jewish public heard about it and protested, including the former high priest Onias III, Menelaus arranged for Onias to be murdered, in an act that horrified the Jewish people. According to the book of Maccabees, Onias sought sanctuary in the holy presinet at Daphne, near the city of Antioch, but Menelaus bribed the local governor to have him killed. His blood, the text says, cried out for heaven for justice. But Menelaus' betrayal was only the beginning. At 170 BC, when Antiochus returned from his campaign in Egypt, he went to the temple in Jerusalem and robbed its treasures. This created even more tension, and shortly after, a rumor spread that Antiochus died, and Yason, the former high priest, used the momentum to arrange a small army and storm Jerusalem to kick Menelaus out of the temple. Antiochus saw it as an act of betrayal against him. In 169 BC, his soldiers entered into the city of Jerusalem, slaughtered thousands, and looted the temple. Sacred vessels, golden menorahs, and treasures dedicated to God were taken to Antioch. The city was left bleeding. 2 years later, in 167 BC, came the decree that would change Jewish history forever. Antiochus demanded complete religious conformity across his empire. He outlawed circumcision, Sabbath observance, and generally the keeping of the mitzvahs, for example, making Jews eating unkosher food. He ordered the Jews to offer sacrifices to pagan gods, and in Jerusalem itself, he set an altar to Zeus Olympius inside the holy temple, and swine were sacrificed upon it. The holiest place on earth for the Jews became a house of idols. Those who refused to comply were tortured and killed. Families that circumcised their sons were executed together with their infants. A known story tells about Hannah and her 7 sons. It is told that they were forced to eat pork in front of Antiochus himself, and when they refused, they were tortured to death one after the other until all were dead, keeping their determined decision not to break the religious law even at the cost of their lives. And then, as those atrocities take place, in a small village called Modi'in, not far from Jerusalem, a priest named Matityahu the Hashmonean rose up and started a movement that will change everything. Our story will continue in the second part of this 3-video series, the Hashmonean Revolt. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more. I am Itai, thank you for watching, I'll see you in the next video, and have a beautiful day.